Hi, everybody. Okay, so let's get buckled in because we're going to have a drive through what we've learned from the various press articles dealing with the court documents that have been released in relation to Jack and Lilly Sullivan. So let's have a very, very quick recap. Jack and Lilly Sullivan went missing on the 2nd of May of this year from their home at Gairloch Road in Pictou County in Nova Scotia. It would appear that they simply vanished without a trace. They were reported missing by their mother, Malehya Brooks-Murray, at 10:01 a.m. on the morning of the 2nd of May. And she told the police that she believed they had left the trailer home that they lived in via the sliding glass doors whilst she and her partner and young child were dozing in and out in the bedroom, and that they had then wandered away from the home. There's a lot more to the story, but that was the basic premise of the report that was made to police. Now, there was a large-scale search that lasted for 6 days. They then stepped that back. They went back to search 2 weekends shortly thereafter, and nothing has come of it. They have now been missing for nearly 4 months. These children are 4 and 6 years of age. They are wonderful, sweet children who deserve the absolute best from life. And at the moment, that's not what they're getting. Hi, Rod Miller. Lovely to see you. So, in the last few days, there's been a release by the RCMP of some court records, unheard of in Canada. It's a bit like the UK. Very, very tight on privacy laws, confidentiality, all of that. But in this case, they've released some documents, albeit they are heavily redacted. Hi, Polar Vortex. Good to see you. So, let's see what we learned from those documents. We don't get to see the documents. That really concerns me in itself, because we know that the police have chosen very specific documents to release. They're heavily redacted. And then the press have all taken their own little bits to report on from those hundreds of pages that they were given. We don't get to pore over them. So it's very hard to make any kind of full determination about what's going on. Why have the RCMP released this information? Well, I think there are 2 potential reasons. The first one is they know that they've dropped the ball with this investigation. I know they are working hard, but I cannot imagine that they have this type of incident happen on a regular basis out there in the sticks. They need to get in some really seriously, highly trained specialists that deal with missing children and offences against children. I'm not suggesting that they don't know how to do the job. What I'm suggesting is this is a very, very niche area. And the more expertise you can draw in, the more likely you are to get a result that is going to be enough to provide answers and justice for everybody concerned. If it's on that basis that they have released the material, I think what they're trying to do is damage limitation. They want to demonstrate that they are looking at all the tips and that they don't think there's anything amiss here. That doesn't mean that they don't think there's anything amiss here, because whilst these are court documents, they're sworn statements to the court, they're not going to lie within those. Knowing that you suspect something isn't enough to put it in these documents. Having a suspicion that one of the parents might be involved, not enough. You've got to have reasonable grounds to believe that it's likely that a criminal offence or a particular action has taken place. And they're very different standards. We're the court of YouTube. We can look at things and make our decisions and decide what we want to make of that without having to have clear evidence to back it up. But unfortunately, the RCMP need that. They need that to be able to put it in any sworn statements. They need it to be able to take any action. And I think that's where the train ends. That they probably have a fair idea that something's gone amiss here, because, let's face it, children don't disappear off the face of the planet. They don't. And somebody in that house knows what happened, and I suspect that the RCMP think the same thing. But being able to demonstrate that in a way that you can put it in a document is very different. I sit there at work on a regular basis and go, well, I know what's happened there. But I don't go to court and say that. What I go to court and say is, I've researched, I've done the investigation, this is what I've come up with, here's the evidence to back up what I'm trying to say. And if I haven't got that, my advice to my client department is, we can't take these proceedings forward, no matter whether we all think the exact same thing, and we're probably right. So that's one element. The other element may be that they want to use this as a tactic. I don't want to go into it in any great depth, because frankly, if they're doing that, I don't want to get in the way of it. And we know that the family is watching everything that they can find that is being put out there. But let's say that you have somebody who likes to speak, or even somebody who won't speak, or people who know they're under suspicion, so they're being very careful. They're thinking about what they're saying, they're sticking to scripts, or attempting to. Not doing a very good job in this case, but attempting to. And you are at a standstill. What you may want to do is get people comfortable enough that they start A, talking again, or B, going about their life as normal, which might also include doing and saying things that can be used. Let's leave it there. I think you can all get the point from that. Yes, Tennessee are just as bad. I completely agree. And yeah, the idea that they may get away with it is hard to stomach. But I think the truth has a way of coming out eventually. So even if in the interim, at the moment, the police can't get together what they need, that doesn't mean it's the end of things. And they're always going back and reviewing cold cases. So every so often they'll go back and look at them again. And it's not cold yet because we're not that far into the investigation. So don't lose hope completely. There is still the possibility that the RCMP will pull in the right type of expertise to get to the bottom of what has gone on here. But I do think they're fighting an uphill battle for a couple of reasons. The first one is when they went to that crime scene, here we go, that's me saying what I think. Leakage. When they went to that home, when the report was made, they should have locked it down as a crime scene. The family should have been made to get out of the trailer and the RV so that they can do their investigation properly. They can do forensics. They can use the police dogs to the greatest effect. They should have gone over that property with a fine-tooth comb, including using luminol and, all of the shebang that they should have at their behest when they're doing these types of investigations. That's the first thing. The other thing is they should not have let Daniel go back out into the woods. They should literally have been told, you sit here, you wait while we do our thing. We're going to be talking to you. And then there should have been different officers who go off and they do the interviews with the parents and Janie and Cindy and Wade and everybody else that might be involved. So that's what I think the reasons for this happening might be. And just because they can't and won't and shouldn't lie in the documents that they submit to the court, the way that they release the documents can be a little bit deceptive because they've given us things that only go up to the middle of July, number one, and they haven't given us everything, is number two, and what they have given us is heavily redacted. So that leaves the question, what else do they know? What else have they done? What questions were asked during the polygraphs? And I'll come on to them in a bit more detail. But they can still be trying to push their own narrative to the public, let's describe it like that. So yeah, obviously, if there's more people involved, you're more likely that someone's going to let something slip. That stands to reason. That being said, this area of the country, I don't know in great detail, but I do know what it's like when you have rural areas with small communities and, as Durwood described them, good old boys like the Mackenzies. So there's a few things in relation to that. First of all, they tend to have their own code of conduct and they have their own ways of serving up justice. But also, they're not likely to be happy about outside involvement, whether that's from media, YouTubers, different creators, or in fact, the authorities. That includes CPS and that includes the RCMP and anyone that's akin to them. So people often in that type of area will shut down. We're told, and I have no reason to doubt the sources that have described it, generally as somewhere that has a problem with mathematic use and generally substance misuse. And again, that adds in this layer of, I'm not going to speak, I'm going to shut down when the authorities come around. Even the kids know they shut down. You don't answer questions, you don't speak to social workers. Here's what you need to say if they ask you certain things, all of those things. I deal with families like that on a daily basis, and it is very difficult to pierce the armour of that type of community. But also, if you look at, then you've got the good old boys scenario. If the Mackenzies are well known in that area, and I don't know whether this is true, this is just based on what Durwood said when he was rambling on. If they're well known, well regarded as good old boys, a bit tough, you're going to face that kind of retribution. If you do anything that smites us, then people aren't going to speak out against them. And people will do anything to get in their good graces, which means they can call in help for the cover-up of something, and people will do it. So there some things that need to be taken into account when we're looking at how did we get to this point 4 months on, or nearly 4 months on. But in terms of what's actually in the documents, so we only have what the media outlets are going to tell us about what they've found interesting. So we need to remember that. But these are the things that I've taken from it. So let me just stop and see what everybody's saying. So it may not have been military gear, Polar Vortex. I know that that's what he said, but it could have been kind of, they were in an official RCMP unit. Maybe, you know, sometimes like the commanders and stuff, they go out in their actual like formal uniform dress. Especially if they've been doing something else and they get called to a place, or they think that the press might be there. Yeah, and if somebody speaks out, they could face very significant retribution if we're talking about people who are prepared to do things to the extent that we think they might to children. What will they do to adults who don't mean anything to them? There is that. So the first thing that I did was look at what can we now say for certain in terms of the timeline based on what the police have corroborated. So we can confirm, not based on the police documents, but I've also added into here some things from the Globe and Mail article, that a third party has seen a photo in September of 2024 where Jack has a potential black eye. And that again, there is another one in December. We also know from the press release by CPS that they did visit the property several months before. Now, people have put two and two together and said that was in December, probably around when Jack had the black eye, but we don't know for certain when exactly they went, but we do know they went several months before, and that was based on school concerns that their home life needed to be assessed, and that included the children being developmentally behind the other children, arriving at school grubby and without appropriate winter clothing. Now, something that did strike me is in the Globe and Mail article, Daniel refers to the visit by CPS being related to the children's learning difficulties, and that they were due to see a doctor for an assessment in relation to autism in the same month that they vanished. So in May of this year, they were due to see someone who was going to assess them. What I will say is a lot of that assessment means that the children are asked to talk a lot. That might have been something that Daniel in particular was particularly worried about. When you've got children who you know have been wronged in some form or other, treated badly, neglected, physically chastised or harmed, and then you know that they're going to have to speak in depth to a professional, that concerns parents, it worries them. Could that have played into this? We know that on the 13th of December of 2024, Jack went on a school trip and had a black eye in the photograph that was taken. Now, when the Globe and Mail put that to Daniel, hi Donna, yes, I am still passionate about covering Jack and Lily's case. I know that I jumped onto the Emmanuel Haro case. I knew it was going to be resolved pretty quickly because the police had narrowed in so quickly on the parents. So that was kind of a brief thing, and we're back to looking at this case, and it deserves attention. So I'll give it the attention. But when the Globe and Mail asked him about the black eye, he chose not to respond. But then in a Facebook group, he posted that Jack had had many black eyes, and one time Lily punched him in the face. Well, I've said this before, and I will say it again. It's not normal for a child to have a black eye during childhood. I don't care what people say about people. Kids get banged about and they're always covered in cuts and bruises. That's true. But only in certain areas. They're in the high impact areas for when you're having accidents and bashing about and bumping into each other and stuff. Black eyes isn't one of those. The things that you need to look out for, and a big part of this channel is I want people to be able to spot when there is something not right. I want people to be able to see a child that's been dropped off at the same time as theirs and think there's something not right with that. Or for teachers and teaching assistants to be able to look at kids and go, I need to report this. This isn't a normal injury, a normal childhood bump and bruise. So what the medical experts say is that there are particular areas that are unlikely to be harmed unless it is inflicted. Doesn't mean that they will never be. So some kids, yes, they will get a black eye because they've been bashed in the face by another sibling with a Tonka truck. But it's unusual and it needs to be given attention. That's all that I'm saying. So the areas that you look for are the eyes, the ears, the palms of your hands, not the heel of your hand, because when you put your hands out, you tend to hit the heel of your hand on the floor. But the actual palms, they very rarely get impacted. Soles of the feet, inside of your arms, your thighs, your buttocks, and the backs of your knees. So the fronts of kids' knees are always scraped. The backs of the knees, that's a really hard area to injure. Any injury to private parts always needs to be given attention. And the neck is another one. Highly unusual for a child to be in a normal rough housing situation or a normal childhood accident and have damage to their neck. If you see a child with marks around the neck, a child that looks like they've got fingertip bruising, so in the, not in front of the thing, so in the pattern of being grabbed like that. I'm not going to do it too hard on myself because I bruise that easily. I'll look like I've been beaten up. And you always have to remember that some kids, they will get bruised really easily because they might be like me and have just that type of tissue. But you pay attention. Better to report something and be wrong than not report it and be right. And by being vigilant and by being willing to speak up, that's the only way that we can protect the children in our society and hopefully stop things getting to the point where tragedies happen. But back to this. Jack and Lily didn't go to school on the Wednesday, the 30th of April, because the school was closed for teacher training. We know that for a fact because we've had it confirmed by the school. We know that at 2:25 they visited Dollarama because we've got confirmation from the police that they were on CCTV, and we've seen Malehya's Google timeline. We know that they got home at 3:11 because of Malehya's Google timeline. Sorry, that was a jump to the next day. I apologise. The 30th of April, they went to Patty's. We don't have any clear confirmation from the police that they have verified any of that. All we know is that the kids didn't go to school. It was a teacher training day. The 1st of May, this is where we know that at 2:25, they went to Dollarama. We know that they got home at 3:11. That's as far as it goes. We've got nothing else that is absolutely confirmed about the 1st of May. In terms of the 2nd of May, we know that Lily and Jack were reported absent at about 6:17 and 6:18. We know that the police call was made at 10:01 and that the police arrived at 10:27. We know that it was at around 4 p.m. that relatives of the family came out of the woods telling the RCMP that they'd found a piece of blanket, pink blanket, that they believed might be Lily's. We now know, and this is new information, that on the 3rd of May at 12:45 a.m, so in the early hours, so essentially it's the night of the 2nd of May, going into the early hours of the 3rd of May, Malehya rang the RCMP to report that the children might be with Cody Sullivan, their biological father, who might have picked them up and taken them to New Brunswick. We know that the police have ruled that out. We also know that Malehya hadn't given Belinda or Cody the address of where they live. So how in Lord's name were they coming to collect them and take them to New Brunswick? And we know that at 2:50 a.m, the RCMP showed up at Cody Sullivan and Belinda's house. The children were not there, and they confirmed that he certainly was not in New Brunswick because he was at home in Muscodobbit, Middle Muscodobbit. I don't know how you say that. I watched Sonny trying to learn, so I've probably butchered it, and I apologise. Then on the 5th of May is the next time we've got anything absolutely verified, which is that Daniel on that day told the Globe and Mail that the pink blanket found in the woods did not belong to Lilly, but that in a subsequent interview he changed his mind and said that it did, and that it'd been potentially planted, having been taken from his week-old garbage. That was at the same time that he also claimed that 2 of his sweaters had mysteriously disappeared from his home after the kids went missing. So we know that he did that on the 5th. And then the next thing we've got absolutely clarified and confirmed from this is the 22nd of May, the police again met with Cody Sullivan. Because there had been a report that a hotel employee had seen him with the children in New Brunswick. Now, that turned out to be false. The police clarifies that. So it doesn't really help us in terms of the timeline, because they've redacted everything so heavily that it's difficult to pull any specific details from it. Before we move on to the next bit, let's have a look, see if anybody's said anything that I can help with. Yeah, in terms of training for people who work with children, there is. That being said, in most places, it is not required that every person who works, say for example in a school, undertakes the training. They're only required to have a lead for safeguarding, and they have the knowledge. But that does not help the day-to-day staff recognise when there's something wrong and they need to report it to the person who's the safeguarding lead. So I think it should be compulsory for anybody who works with children or comes into contact with children to have safeguarding training. An in-depth safeguarding training, not half a day. Boom, there you go, you know all about it now, because it's not enough. It's so it's so surface level when they do the either day or half a day courses. Yes, it's helpful, but it's not enough to protect our children. And they're our most precious resource. We need to do everything that we can to look after them. So what I then did was moved on to see what we can pull from the information. And then at the end, we'll look at what the police are saying and what we can draw from that. So we're told that they took the children's toothbrushes from the home. That's a very standard thing. That's so that they've got a sample of DNA that they know is each of those children's. And it's for either later identification purposes or to do matches with forensic testing they're doing on the various items of evidence that they might collect. So that's straightforward. And we know that from the home, they seized a partial pink blanket from the trash bag at the end of the driveway that was in a big green kind of garbage box. I wouldn't call it a bin. I assume they put it there for collection, but I stand to be corrected if that's not true. And they matched that blanket with the piece that was found in the tree that was exactly 1 kilometre from the home, in a tree on the pipeline, or in the area of the pipeline. Now, for me, I know that there was a boot print on the driveway, and it was a very suspiciously placed one boot print, and we can read a lot into it. But the pipeline is the more interesting and sensitive area, because there were a few things found there. And not only were there a few things found there, everybody seemed to focus on it. Daniel, Malehya's family members, and the RCMP. The fact that both sides and the RCMP have focused on it says to me that it's important. So what did they find? Well, we learnt that they found a sock. That's not been mentioned before. And we've learnt that the paperwork says children's boot prints, not footprints, bare footprints, which is what we've been led to believe by family members. What would the police have done differently? Well, I certainly think that that would have been a very good reason to hold him. And by holding him, you can then put increased pressure on him. I have very little doubt in my mind that the local RCMP are well aware of which houses in the area have some relation to substance use. Generally speaking, the police are pretty well in the know. Being able to prove things is a whole nother story, and often they choose their battles and choose the things that they want to focus in on. So a really good example is if you have a string of low-level street dealers that you know the addresses of, but you want to get at the kingpin, if we're using Breaking Bad terminology, then you may completely overlook the fact that these individuals at the low level are actually committing the offences that they're committing, because you're using their offences and their actions to pull information in and intelligence that's going to lead you to the place that you want to really get, which is, how do we get this problem as a whole off the streets? We hit the top of the chain, not the bottom. Because there'll always be runners, there'll always be young people who need, money and want to look cool and all of those things, and so they're very easily manipulated, and in many cases outright exploited. So the police will often pick their battles. It would have been a potential tactic that they could use to hold him on the drugs charges while they put pressure on him about this. But you've got to be really careful, because obviously if you're holding him on those charges, you should be speaking to him only about those charges. You just use the opportunity while you've got him there to get to the bottom of what's happening with the disappearance, not that you're pointing blame at him. But it creates difficulties, because when the police are documenting what they're saying to him and what conversations have been had, really easy to accidentally make it seem like you're doing exactly what you are, which is using the drug charge as a tactic to get at him. So sometimes people will take that risk and other times they won't. Depends on the officers. And their confidence in whether or not they can make sure that the paperwork is properly filled out, so as to not get them in any bother and impact on the likelihood of convictions sticking. So we know that there was a clump of boot prints now. So this isn't what we were told originally. We were told that they had found a child's boot print or a child's footprint. We're now told in these papers that there is a clump of boot prints in 2 different sizes, including a child's. And then in one of the other articles, it confirms that that is a child size 11, which matches Lily's boots. That being said, every child generally goes through the point where they are a size 11, so she's not the only child in the area who's a size 11. So it's not a smoking gun. We can't confirm that it was her. They didn't pay full attention to that area until a bit later, when the search had already been ongoing. We know that there were family members who brought children with them. There were adult boot prints, which, if it had been immediately found and cast, and then, say, for example, there was some DNA found in the area, or the dogs had picked up the scent, which they didn't, then you could potentially have put together a circumstantial link between the size of the various boots, say the treads on that, and the shoes that one of the family members wears, to say that it was Lily and a family member. But it doesn't look like that's what they were able to do, or that's what happened. Although what I will say, and I'll preface this as being true for everything that we cover here, the police have told us all of the things that they did, and they've told us about some of the things that they found. What they haven't done is given us the results of any of the tests and investigations that they've carried out, which is absolutely infuriating. Hi, Sue. It's good to see you. So nice to have people on the live and not be talking just to myself. So let me see, what else did they find? The information shows us that they did do castings and indent impressions of the boot prints on the pipeline, but it doesn't say whether they matched anything, the type of boot that we know that Lilly owned, or any of the family members for the adult boots or anything. So doesn't really give us any great information. An investigator's comment in the papers says, as of July the 16th, that because Lilly's boot print was confirmed to be a size 11, it is consistent with the boot print located on the pipeline trail in the search area. Now, you remember these documents were drafted for the purpose of getting approval to do certain things. So they want to state things as strongly as they can without being deceptive in the document. So yes, it's the same size. It doesn't say that it's consistent with the type of boot tread that we know she owned, because they gave us a make and where they bought it from, and we went and checked. Police dogs did attend where the boot prints were found, but they didn't pick up a scent. Now, that to me is strange, and I say that because it's a rugged, natural surface, the flooring on the pipeline trail. It should have held the scent of the children. If they'd walked along there during that morning, it should have still been present. Now, that was close to the boot prints on the blanket, and the dogs walked that stretch of the pipeline trail, so they didn't pick up the scent at the blanket either. And again, it's strange, particularly if the blanket's been there and it's been held a lot by one of the children. Now, we find out from the statements made by Malehya that her view is that that blanket had been Lily's. She had often carried it around with her, but she then decided she didn't want it anymore, and so they had started to use it to cover up the door to stop drafts. Bear with me. Now, that's going to mean that her scent on it fades. She also says that when he was putting it up, Daniel ripped it, which is why there was a separate piece. So the question has to be, where did that piece get put in order for it to suddenly end up on the pipeline when the children disappeared? How long was it hung up on the door? Where had that extra piece been stored? And was it in a place where Lilly could access it if she was suddenly feeling like she needed to take a bit of her blanket with her, and she wanted to go back to a time that she felt safe for going out when she went out that morning? I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that I think that's what happened. I'm just kind of playing that out in my mind. Darlene, I'm also praying for them, and I want the best case scenario to be true, which is that they were taken and hidden somewhere. Second best scenario, they were actually abducted, because at least they'd be alive and there'd be a hope of them being found. But I'm also very realistic about the fact that that's unlikely. And if that is the case, that those things aren't true, then what I want more than anything is justice for them. No child should ever be mistreated, no child should ever be physically harmed, and no child should be unalived, and especially by the people who are supposed to care for them, who are supposed to do anything, including give up their own lives for those children. Unfortunately, not everybody in the world holds children in such high regard as we do. And we have to be realistic about that. To many people, they are simply a nuisance, and they get to stick around because they're a paycheck. Right. Okay. So what else did they find? They found scat, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is poop, which could be human or animal. And they don't say whether or not that was sent for forensic testing. I know that children will do very random things and go to the toilet wherever they feel like going to it. So, you know, they need to test it. I hope they have. But what are the results, and why aren't you telling us whether you sent it for testing and what the results are? Hi, Raven Sunstar even. I can't speak today particularly well. I'm so tired. I can't even describe. Been a busy day. Been gardening. Planting some bedding flowers and doing the dreaded weeding. Although I've not got very far with it, if I'm brutally honest. They found a piece of purple fabric. Now, I don't think we've heard about that before either, or maybe I just kind of glossed over it. I don't know, but I don't remember hearing about a piece of purple fabric. It doesn't indicate whether it was identified by the parents as potentially being anything to do with the children. So that's a question that I'm left with. The pink blanket piece was found. Now, what the police documents say is that it was found by 3 family members of Malehya in a tree on Lansdowne Station Road, 1 kilometre from the home, and it was found on the 2nd of May. Now, the bit in the garbage, we had this whole story that, you know, there was a call back to the house, and then Daniel and Justin went into the garbage to have a look, and it was filmed, and they identified that. The RCMP didn't come back to the property to look at that blanket from the garbage until the 4th of May, 2 days later. And this is where I think that they are doing things that can be classed as dropping the ball. So for a chain of evidence, for a piece of evidence, you need to be able to demonstrate where it's been at every moment from when it's first discovered. If they found out about it via call or being sent a video on the 2nd of May and they didn't then go and collect it until the 4th of May, what happened with it in that interim period? Anybody could have done anything with it. It's these little bits that often officers who are knee deep, up to their eyes in it, trying to deal with an intensive situation. They forget about things like the chain of evidence and making sure that, it's bagged, sealed. Anybody who touches it, it's recorded who's had the hands on it. If the bag is opened, it's recorded who opened it, when they opened it, what they did with it, when they put it back, when it was resealed. And things like that are what defence solicitors will home in on. And it can literally make a trial go down the Swanee for the prosecution, just because one person didn't sign a particular form at the right time. And that was the crucial piece of evidence in the case. We're told in these documents that both Malehya and Daniel confirmed to the RCMP that the blanket belonged to Lilly. So the fact that he told the Globe and Mail something completely different is quite bizarre. Just demonstrates again the games that are being played by the people involved, which drives me up the flipping wall. Yeah, now, as far as I'm aware, the Major Crimes Unit were involved from either the first or second day. And they should know better. But that being said, they're not there every second of the way with each of the officers that are there on scene. And if they don't deal with this type of serious, significant case on a regular basis, they won't necessarily appreciate how absolutely imperative it is that you comply with all the little tiny rules that police get given for a very valid reason. We don't say there needs to be a chain of evidence or a chain of custody, they sometimes call it, for a piece of evidence for no reason. It's for a valid reason. It's to make sure that it's not tampered with. It's to protect the person who's being prosecuted, because we can show exactly what's happened with that piece of evidence and that they're not being set up. Now, the police tell us in these documents that they continue to receive forensic results, which they are assessing, including the blanket. They don't tell us what any of the results are that they've received, which leaves us completely in the dark on that point. But I think they just want to demonstrate that they are still working hard to try and solve this. They've had over 740 tips and 9,300 videos. That's a lot of material to go through. I don't envy them in the task that they've got. But unfortunately, it's a very important task. It's going to need to be done very carefully. And taking the time to make sure that you do everything properly. Cross all your T's, you dot all your I's, then you've got it nailed on when you get to the finish line, if you get to the finish line. Now, we know that in terms of the search efforts, they used drones, helicopters, they looked at land, they looked at waterways. We also know that they looked at wells and mine shafts, and they went out to about 8.5 kilometres from the property. They also used a police search dog up to about 1 kilometre from the home. And we know that, well, don't know whether it was that dog, but we know that a police dog walked the pipeline and didn't pick up a scent. Given that they came on that particular day to the property itself with the police dog, had they just wandered away, it would be very unusual on that type of surface for two human beings not to leave a scent enough that the dogs could pick it up. And that leads me to believe that whilst it's not infallible, it's unlikely that they wandered away or were led away. It would stop if they were put in a vehicle. We know that the RCMP zeroed in around the gas pipeline. We also know that they drained the septic tank on the home property. And that was to no avail. So what investigative steps did they take that we find out about from these papers? That's the next step. So we find out that they completed 12 applications under the Missing Persons Act to access various records. That included all electronic devices and data used by Malehya and Daniel between the 1st of May at 2:25 p.m, which is the last known proof of life, and the 2nd of May at 10:27 a.m, which is when the RCMP arrived at the property. So that's why they will have chosen that particular slot. I would hope that they also sought to access at least 2 weeks before, because sometimes these things are accidents. Sometimes these things are not an accident, but the spur of the moment. But other times, unfortunately, they are planned, and there is evidence on devices of searches, of messages between individuals, making plans about what they're going to do. And also, and I've said this in a previous video, the RCMP need to look at how these children were treated while they were in the home before they disappeared. For that, looking at the digital records will give any indication of other photographs where the children have got bruises, any discussions about whether they should or shouldn't physically discipline, if that's the right word, the children, or any incidents where, you know, things have gotten out of hand when discipline is being doled out. Often, and it infuriates me, parents will frame what is essentially inflicted harm on a child as discipline and chastisement. Let me be very clear. Any kind of physical chastisement is not very effective in terms of doing your job as a parent, which is to grow a well-rounded, successful human being that is safe and hasn't been damaged in any way psychologically, emotionally, or physically. That being said, there are still parents who think that it is appropriate to use physical chastisement. Now, a very light tap on the outside of a leg or whatever it may be is a world away from some of the things that people do and call it discipline. Let me also be clear, you're not doing anything to help your child develop the right skills if your version of discipline is making them do wall sits, running up and down the stairs until you tell them to stop, standing stock still in a corner and not moving an inch until you tell them. None of those things are building the skills for a successful human being, a successful adult who can go out and flourish on their own and become the best version of themselves. It will leave them scarred. If it doesn't leave them physically scarred, it will leave them psychologically scarred. If you are unsure of how to deal with your children's behaviour, look up some positive parenting methods. Look up how to have proper conversations with your child. And if you can't find anything online, then go and speak to your local children's services, because they have access to a wealth of material and a wealth of courses that you can take. And it isn't just people who have had allegations made against them or reports made about them that access these courses. Good parents are prepared to go and get help if and when they need it. Some of the courses can be brilliant. So, for example, one of the courses that we used to run that was really, really popular was a dealing with teenage years course. Because often that is a time in a child's life when the relationship between child and parent becomes fractured. Because in a completely natural way, as children get to that stage, they want to challenge, they want to push back a little bit, they want to explore their own independence, their own ideas, find out who they are. And it's often a time period when parents find it very difficult to let go. There's then lots of kind of animosity that builds. So we ran a course that was aimed at how do you keep that relationship being a good relationship. And it was really successful. So there are resources out there. But as I say, parents will often couch what they're doing in terms of this was chastisement, this was discipline, when it's not. It's outright mistreatment. And just because something was done to you as a child, because things were different back then, which is a phrase that I hear so frequently, doesn't mean it was right when it was done to you, and it doesn't mean that you get to repeat the cycle. You can break the cycle, but often it's just repeated because people parent how they were parented. And it's something that you've got to work at if you want to parent in a different way to how you were parented. So I hope that they look at a longer period. They were looking at all call logs, chat logs, email logs, cell phone records, school bus surveillance, bank records for both Daniel and Malehya, other company documentation, So anybody's guess what that includes. GPS information for the whereabouts of both Malehya and Daniel, and Malehya's Text Plus account. So there's been a lot made of this. Malehya deleted an app called Text Plus, and I think, Marlene, a few people have said that it's a high human trafficking area. It would surprise me if that particular area in Nova Scotia was, because it's so very isolated. But it doesn't mean that it can be ruled out. That being said, I'll come on to what I think about the chances of that in a little bit. So, Text Plus, what is it? It's a Wi-Fi calling app. So it isn't one of these end-to-end encryption, have a secret conversation with your lover and nobody can see it, or indeed have a secret conversation with the person you're planning an abduction of your own children with kind of app. It doesn't use encryption. It's a Wi-Fi calling app. Now, we know from the police radio material that can be found on Plunder's channel, which is an excellent channel. She often does a great amount of information access requests, and provides us with all sorts of good material because she's fired them. So we know that the cell service in that area was terrible, because there was an officer saying there is no cell service, it's really, really patchy. We've got up-to-date photographs of the children. Do you want us to go out of the area to get cell service to be able to send them to you? Now, they were told, yes, go out of the area. Had I been those officers, I'd of course asked the family members, do you have Wi-Fi? Because a lot of phones do Wi-Fi calling, and in any event you could have used email or something if you had access to the Wi-Fi. But high stress situation, you suddenly realise your phone's got no signal, and you don't think quite as clearly as you might if you were just looking at it from an outside perspective. So no criticism there, but they have to go out of area to be able to send these photographs. So a Wi-Fi calling app would have been very useful to somebody living in that property. It was much later on, I think early July, that the police saw the records, and at that time Malehya said that she had deleted the app because she doesn't need it anymore. Now, I think a lot has been read into this as, well, she doesn't need it anymore because she's no longer having to conspire with her relatives or friends to have the children moved. Actually, it could just be she's now moved on to the res and they've got cell service. She doesn't need Wi-Fi calling. So I don't think we can read into it what a lot of people are. It may be far more simple. I'm not saying close your eyes to the fact that it may have been used for a nefarious purpose. Again, we know that the police obtained that material. We've got no idea what was in it. So it doesn't help us in any way with trying to understand what the scenario is in this case. It doesn't improve our understanding of what happened. What I would like to know is, why didn't they seek those records until July? That blows my mind. That's 2 months after they went missing. All of the requests for material should have been put in, the basic ones, and this is a basic one. The basic one should have been put in within the first couple of days, because it takes time for them to be processed. It takes time for the court to swear the warrants. It takes time for the companies to provide the information once they're served with them. And I'm not joking, it can take some significant time. So when we seek records, obviously at the moment where I'm working is in child protection stuff, not criminal stuff, but it can take 28 days, and they won't shorten the timescale for you unless you can give them a really, really good reason, and they like that really, really good reason. So it can take a long time for that material to come. So it's important that you do the requests really early doors. Don't leave them kind of floating about in the office somewhere. We now know that they obtained camera footage from the Cobequid Pass toll plaza, which is part of the Trans-Canada Highway between Nova Scotia, in Nova Scotia, between the 1st of May at 2:25. So again, it's this time frame, 1st of May to 25 p.m, when the children were last seen alive on surveillance, and the 3rd of May to 2025 at 3 a.m. Now, the reason they've chosen 3 a.m. is because that is the time that they turned up at Cody's house, and what they were looking for is whether or not Cody or any other person, but specifically Cody, because of Malehya's tip, had taken the children out of the area. He hadn't. We know that because they turned up at his house. What we don't know is whether they found evidence on there of anybody else taking them, but I assume not. And I say that because even now they say that there is no evidence that the children were abducted, although they're keeping all options open. Literally means that they haven't got any evidence that it happened. Now, one of the things that's been focused on a lot, let's just have a look at some of these comments. So, Starchild, I don't know the area enough to know that there are alternative routes, but I'm going to take your word for it. If there is, I suppose the question then is, are there any cameras on those routes, and did they actually seek the footage? Because obviously they've only given us access to some of the material that they've got. We don't know all of the steps that they've taken. We don't know all of the requests for information that they've made. The fact that they've got 9,300 videos would suggest that potentially they did see footage from other routes going out of the area. But it still remains a mystery for us. Yeah, I mean, literally, they've given us like a tiny fraction of what they've got. They're not going to give us everything. they've given us what they've given us for a specific purpose. And it doesn't really clear up any of the confusion, frankly. But we're still left with lots and lots of questions. One of the areas that's been really, really heavily focused on is the polygraphs. Now, we all know that they are not admissible in a court. Why aren't they admissible? Well, they're not admissible because they're not that reliable. So, number one, we can't rely on the results. Just in our own minds, we can't say someone passed or someone failed. That means something. The police use it as a tool. They use it as a tool to think, is there any sign of deception? But the biggest reason that they use it is not actually to do with the results, it's to do with the actual process. And that is a process of putting pressure and cognitive load onto a person. Because if someone's going to crack and tell you something, often when they think, oh my God, this is going to demonstrate that I'm lying. So they use them for a purpose. There are ways and means of getting around them. And we have to remember that when we're looking at what we find out. The other thing that we've got to really think about is any polygraph is only as good, even in its unreliable state, as the questions that get asked. And it's very easy to ask questions that mean that somebody can answer, believe that they're being truthful, so they pass the test because the question gives alternative options. So, one example is Daniel tells us in the interview that he did that they asked him, did you kill Jack and Lilly? If something happened to one of those children other than by him actually unaliving them, but he did unalive the other one, and he didn't unalive both of them, and that's what the question asks. So he could happily say no, and he's answering truthfully so he can stay calm, not lying. Absolutely does not mean in any way, shape or form that he wasn't involved in their disappearance or demise. So it all depends on how skilled the questioning is. If what Daniel describes is accurate, they focused on the death of the children, not on their disappearance. In fact, what he describes, and this is corroborated to a certain degree by the police themselves, because they talk about the red room with the children, saying it that way around, for all the reasons that we know about YouTube. There is absolutely a special hell for lowlives that lie regarding children, full stop. Hi, Angelina and Angels. Yeah, there's loads and loads of documents that we're never, ever going to get the privilege of seeing. We're not seeing these documents, let's face it. Flipping heck, they've given them to a select few news outlets and have probably said, can you do an article that focuses on these bits? We need your help. And they do sometimes do that. They'll ask for the help of the press. So we've got to think about the fact that we don't know what the questions were. If the questions are couched in the terms that Daniel has described and that's corroborated by the use of those phrases in the actual police document. So they talk about whether the family are involved in the Red Room of Jack and Lilly. Well, why are you using those phrases? If you don't think that might be what happened, that's a big jump from there's no evidence of a criminal offence. Talk about going from nothing to the most serious offence that you can get. What about all the elements in between that might have happened? We've all looked at, could it have been an accident? Could they have got into the substances that were in the home? Could it have been, something that one of the parents has done whilst they're using substances that has just gone a step too far? Or, all of these things, could they have, worked out how to remove the children for whatever reason without the other one knowing? There are many, many, many options between Zero and Red Room. Many. And if they've focused their questions on the top end of the scale, then it doesn't tell us anything about whether anything in the middle of the scale happened. We know from these documents that Malehya took her polygraph on the 12th of May at the Bible Hill detachment, which showed that she was truthful when answering 4 specific questions, all of which were redacted. So that tells us 0. It doesn't tell us whether it did or did not eliminate her as a suspect. It did not tell us anything about what she may or may not be involved in. So it's no help to us whatsoever. Daniel, same day, 12th of May, at the same place. He has told us in his interview that he asked for that polygraph examination and that all the questions were focused on whether or not he unalived Lilly and Jack. It was nothing about their disappearance, nothing about their harm. It was all about whether he'd unalived them. Again, it says that he was truthful when answering specific questions. In one of the articles, it says polygraph indicated he was truthful. Doesn't mention the 4 questions. An unidentified investigator's comment included at the end of the section with Malehya and Daniel's results says at this point in the investigation, so this was early on though, remember, Jack and Lilly's disappearance is not believed to be criminal in nature. I do not have reasonable grounds to believe a criminal offence has occurred. Now remember what I said earlier about those words. Reasonable grounds to believe that it has occurred. Not I think it might have. I suspect it might have. all of us, when we're sat in the huddle at the beginning of the day, think that it did. Evidence that provides them reasonable grounds to believe that it has occurred. It's a high bar. So no, they cannot lie in those documents that are sworn for the purposes of making applications to gain access to documents and things. But equally, it doesn't demonstrate to us anything about what they actually think may or may not have happened, because they've got to be able to meet that bar to put it in the document. Goes on to say, because Jack and Lilly are still missing, polygraph examinations were conducted with the intention of ruling out that possibility. Doesn't then go on to say, and it did rule out that possibility, or it didn't rule out that possibility. Now, we know it didn't rule out that possibility because they're currently still keeping all options on the table. So you've always got to read between the lines about what they're saying. 28th of May, Daniel told the Canadian press that he had passed his poly. Now, it does not use the word pass in relation to Malehya or Daniel. The only people those documents, as far as we can tell from the articles, it uses the word pass in relation to, is Cindy, Wade and Cody. It talks about some element of truthfulness for Daniel and Malehya, and in terms of Janie's, it said that it was a physiology was incompatible. So no report was prepared. I'm just having a look at your comments. So, yeah, this wrench is a big question mark in my head. And frankly, the safety of putting a wrench on the top of a door that might fall off when you open it, on a door that they clearly don't lock, when there's children in the house, is insane. There's been so many inconsistencies and confusions in this case that it is very hard to make head and tail of what actually happened. But Angelina, I'm still praying, of course, that they're safe, they're alive, that they'll be brought back to Belinda. Whether that will happen is to be found out in the future, but I severely doubt it, unfortunately. You think the family was mobbed first and snack happiest decided to film in pandemonium to build a case? I'm confused. Not sure what you mean. Do I think it's going to go into a cold case? I think there's a very big chance that it will. I hope that it doesn't. I hope that what the RCMP are doing is a tactic that actually means that there's something going on in the background, but I am worried about it. I'm worried about why they've done this. and when they've done it. Um, yeah, I mean, who puts a wrench on top of a door? I read it and I had to reread it about 3 times. I'm thinking, like, it makes you think of the pranks where someone puts a glass of water on the top of the door or something, and someone opens the door and it pulls the string and it tips the water on the head. Can you imagine a 4-year-old with a wrench falling from the height of a full height door onto them? What damage that could do? Is it leakage? Is that involved in some way? I don't know, but it blew my mind, the idea that either of them thought that was okay. Bear or no bear, just lock your doors. Online counsel, do you mean like counselling? I think, at the end of the day, people can get certificates for many, many things. You always have to do your homework about who has what qualifications and what their experience is. So if you're going to use an individual person as a professional on any particular thing, then you want to look at the qualifications, but you also then want to ask them questions about their actual experience. Yeah, I mean, CPS or CFS, wherever you are in the world, they tend to have a very high staff turnover. That has its own problems because the more staff turnover, the less people really get to know the families. Things get lost along the way if someone's not made a full note of a particular visit where they've seen something. So I understand what you're saying in terms of, allegations that have been false allegations that have long since been proved, and then they're not updated on the files. I think where the medical evidence is found in a quick turnaround, then it's usually updated pretty well. There will always be errors, there'll always be human errors. The problem is the stress levels because of the lack of resources and the understaffing in social services, children's services type of scenarios across the world, is that people are so busy doing the work that they find it hard to find the time to write up the notes. And then things get missed. The systems need to be better. One of the biggest problems, though, unfortunately, and it's referenced time and time again in almost every inquiry into something bad that's happened, is communication between departments. So it's like the communication between police and schools and CPS and health. If they all speak to each other properly and have good lines of communication open, we can do a lot to protect our children. But unfortunately, red tape often stands in the way of that. And the general kind of processes and procedures that people put in place for those types of information sharing arrangements aren't good enough to provide the appropriate assistance. Yeah, if you want to use like therapist that's local, that you can ask questions about their experience, and that you can get reviews from previous clients. What else are we saying? Yeah, Marlene, in terms of scent, so if, for example, you've got a shiny hard floor in a building, that's not going to hold the scent of anybody for very long. But where you've got like stone and soil and grass and all of those kind of natural surfaces, every time somebody's dragging past it, or just walking past, and your cells are sloughing off, you're leaving the scent, and it doesn't leave. It will soak into the soil after a certain period when it's raining, but generally speaking, it will be retained on the rugged surfaces. So even if it rains, if you've got a rock, it'll kind of stay on the underside. I know I hate using the correct lingo, but the problem is they literally just don't show your video to anybody, DJ. So I'd love to just use the proper phraseology. I'm an adult, I work in this area, I find it very hard to use strange terms for things, because on a day-to-day basis I'm saying these things all the time. But equally, I want my videos to be seen by people. I want them to be an educational tool. And that's not going to happen if YouTube won't show it to anybody. There are definitely not enough foster homes or indeed residential placements for those children who need something a bit more specialist. And I think, again, that's something that's true wherever you live. I think pointing fingers if you suspect any kind of mistreatment is perfectly acceptable if it's a true concern that you've got, because it's always better. I've had a report made about me. Literally, they came round, they spoke to me. That was the end of that. But I'd rather somebody did that if they were worried about my child than not. The parents who don't do anything wrong are not going to have a problem with it. The people who've got a real issue with other people pointing fingers at them, generally speaking, are the ones who have got something to hide. I'd rather my child was protected, end of story. And I'd rather there were 10 false reports if it meant that I knew that it was being followed up on. So it's always better to say something and be wrong than to not say something. Because if people don't step in, very bad things happen to children every day, all around the world. And that's something that I've spent my career trying to fight against. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. There is a stigma attached to being a cared for child, absolutely. And I don't think we will ever completely get away from that. But there's lots of work being done to try and reduce that level of stigma, and to find like language that we can use when describing things and talking to children, that kind of reduces the the way that people perceive children who are, so over here we call them cared for children. But it's a really difficult balance to keep, because sometimes that stigma is far safer and better for the child than not having the stigma and being at home. And it's got to be something that we're always balancing. Not an easy feat, got to be said. Yeah, and there are a lot of, obviously, 16 and 17-year-olds. If you've come through the care system, and you get to that age, you still receive support, but you do live independently. So you should get some kind of leaving care service if the system where you live is of a decent standard. So I'm going to come away from the chat now and just get back to this. Think about what else I wanted to say, if anything, about polygraphs. I think that's all we can draw really from the polygraphs. A big fat 0. In terms of the RCMP updates that have been provided, what they've said is the Nova North East Major Crime Unit continues to lead a very active, intensive investigation with assistance from agencies across Canada. They have not ruled out any scenario or confirmed the circumstances of the children's disappearance, which continues to be investigated at this time under the Missing Persons Act. They're not going to officially change the name of that into this is a criminal investigation until they've got probable cause, so sufficient evidence to provide them with a belief that a criminal offence has been committed. Has been, not might have been. But the reality on the ground is they'll be looking at it from a criminal perspective and from a missing person's perspective. She also reiterated, and this was only on Friday last week, that there is no evidence that the children were abducted, but every possibility is being considered. No evidence that they have been abducted. Now, a lot has been made of one particular tip that came in, which was from a lady whose name was Natasha. She made the report on the 31st of May of seeing 2 children on Gairloch Road. She says that on the 2nd of May, so the day that the children disappeared, doesn't say what time, whilst travelling with her sons, she saw a young girl around 10 years of age holding a young boy around 6 years of age's hand, walking along the side of the road northbound near the corner of Gairloch Road and Lansdowne Station Road toward Westville. And they were going towards a Caucasian woman around 50 to 60 years old with a loose curl haircut, who was waiting with the rear door open on an older model tan or gold sedan. The vehicle appeared to be waiting for them. The descriptions of the people that she gave were that the young girl was approximately 10 years of age, with darkish hair in pigtails, wearing a blue tank top with blue strings. And the young boy was approximately 5 years of age, 5 to 6 years of age, with dirty blonde hair, wearing shorts. Caucasian woman was around 50 to 60 years old and had a loose curl haircut. Now, bear in mind, at any point during an investigation, they can put out an Amber Alert. They didn't after this. This would have given them a model, a vehicle, a type of vehicle to look for, a description of a vehicle, and a description of a person. That didn't happen. They have also said that they still don't think that there is evidence that the children were abducted. On that basis, I believe, can't say for definite because they don't tell us, they ruled out this tip. The ages are wrong, the clothing is wrong. It doesn't tell us what time of day she saw them. And they've done nothing about it. If that was a valid tip that they believed might lead to something, they'd have asked for the public's help in finding this person and this car. The fact that they didn't tells us everything we need to know. It's not important. DJ, I'm not going to get into a debate about, whether there are corrupt workers. I think there's corrupt workers in any profession. The majority of people in children's social work, children's social care, go into it for the right reasons. Don't go into it for the money. Certainly don't. Because it's not very well paid and it's a hell of a job. There are massive problems with the system, and there will always be bad apples in any profession. I think it's important that anything that can be identified that's gone wrong is identified, and that lessons are actually learnt from it. And I hate that phrase, lessons to be learnt, because they never are, or very rarely are. If we want to do better for our children, we've got to learn the actual lessons. So from that point of view, I think we're on the same page. But it's really difficult in terms of I could spend all day debating and talking about it, and that's not the purpose of this live. So hopefully improvements are made to the systems and we do get better at what we're supposed to be doing. So, Angelina, let me just look at that. So, I mean, it's a matter for the RCMP to decide whether or not it's appropriate to do an Amber Alert on each occasion, and I'm not going to get into it because it always kicks off a big fuss. Cadaver dogs, absolutely, they should have been on the scene the first flipping day as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of the ruling things out, what exactly did they say? Because bear in mind, we don't have the actual document, so we've only got what the different articles say, but I'm just having a look. So the quote that is on the actual RCMP update is, but every possibility is being considered. Another quote was that the case may progress to being criminal should the elements of a criminal offence be identified. What else does it say? Of course, there was so many different articles that they've all got different approached the RCMP for comment, and they've all got a slightly different one. So let's just have a look and see exactly what they've said to each person. So Alison Gerard of the RCMP says, intensive investigative work is ongoing in relation to the disappearance of Lilly and Jack. Tips continue to be received. We now have over 700 and are evaluated and prioritised by a dedicated team of investigators in the North East Nova Major Crime Unit with the assistance of agencies from across Canada. When asked whether the investigation had turned criminal, she said, a tremendous amount of careful, deliberate investigative work is ongoing. The Major Crime Unit continues to investigate Jack and Lily's disappearance under the Missing Persons Act, and the team remains committed to exploring all possible scenarios. Ella MacDonald from the RC got a quote from them, from the RCMP, saying that they are sparing no resource in the search for the missing brother and sister. And then in another one, Cindy Bayers said investigators have and will continue to receive forensic results, including those related to the pink blanket, which they are assessing. Let me see what else they say. Trying to find if I've recorded exactly where it said that, Angelina. Okay, so I can't find that quote, Angelina. If you can tell me which article it was in, we can go to the article, because I've got them all up on individual tabs. But I think when you look at all of them together, it's clear that they're not closing their eyes to any potential possibility. And I've said this before, when you're doing an investigation of any kind, you need to keep an open mind. And so the police in the UK are required to follow all reasonable leads, follow all reasonable lines of inquiry. Okay. So even if you think, as the officer, that Malehya took the children and hid them, you cannot close your eyes to the line of inquiry that says there's something going on in terms of Daniel. We can see that there is evidence that he may have been abusive, etc. So it's always about, as an investigator, staying impartial, keeping all your options open, and keeping an open mind about things, and following all of the reasonable lines of inquiry. Now, reasonable is the key word there. You don't have to follow all lines of inquiry, because that would be physically impossible. It's reasonable ones. So it's where there is some information that's sending you in that direction that's credible. Credibility is a whole nother topic, which I could speak about for days, but for me, I think the sighting of the two children is a red herring. The idea that Malehya has said that Cody might have the children is a red herring. The police went off and properly followed up those tips by Malehya and others very quickly. So there were 3 in total. At 12:45 a.m. on the 3rd of May, Malehya reported to the police that she thought Cody might have picked them up and taken them to New Brunswick. At 3 a.m. they arrived at his property and he was there and the children weren't. At some other time on the 3rd of May, there was a report that Lilly and Jack might be with their biological father from an unknown caller who didn't have any proof and just wanted to make sure that every possibility was looked into. Well, any investigator in their right mind is going to go, okay, this is a separated set of parents. If they disappear from one, you've got to consider that they might be with the other. I don't think they needed to be told that by a member of the public. And then on the 7th of May, there was a tip received that the children had been seen by a hotel employee in New Brunswick with Cody. It was anonymous. They looked into it, didn't come to anything. Starchild, no, it wouldn't be enough to trigger the idea of possible abduction. There needs to be some indication that there was a vehicle seen or a person seen, or, you know, the children screamed or you could hear dragging or something like that for it to be considered as a possibility. To put out an alert, they need to have either a description of a person or a description of a vehicle, otherwise they can't do it. If they say they haven't ruled out all scenarios, does that mean possible abduction as well? They've basically said that everything's on the table. So they've not ruled anything out as at the 16th of July. Remember, these documents only go up to the 16th of July. We're now a month on. So we don't know what their current scenario is. But it looks like they've not ruled anything out and they've not really pinned anything down. They're not telling us what their preferred theory is. They will have a preferred theory, no doubt, but it's whether they've got the evidence to back that up. And I think this is the problem in many of these cases that go cold, or that we see it taking a long time for them to be for there to be any action or any answers. It's because the police have got a fair idea of what might have happened. They can see from everything that they find out, because they'll have spoken to many people who were directly involved with those children and with the parents. They'll know, what is borne out as the most likely set of things to have happened. But it's finding the actual evidence to prove it, and that's the difficult bit. And of course, if someone's reasonably good at finding somewhere to hide a person, whatever state they're in, then that's a problem. And if you're allowed to stay in a crime scene of an event, whatever you want to call it, whilst people are running around searching for the children, then, well, you can do a lot to cover up anything that might have happened. I thought I'd read all of the articles, Angelina. If you spot it again and you see which article it is, will you come back and put another comment on and tell me which it was, or drop me an email? It's Crime Courtroom Confidential @gmail.com. And let me know which one it is, and I'll go back and have a look at it. Because I thought I'd found them all. But obviously, I'm not going to get automatically shown everything from Nova Scotia because I'm not in Nova Scotia. I thought that I'd been thorough in my search, but I don't know what all the local news companies are. So I can only go off what Google shows me when I do in various type in various searches. I do worry that if the police ever come and look at my computer, some of the searches that I do type could look really bad. Anybody in the true crime world, I think, has the same thought. Like, Angelina, don't panic about it. And just, if you do spot it and you think, oh, it was that one, just like pop a comment on whatever live we're on. And I'll then go and have a look at it. But yeah, I do think, good Lord, if the police look at some of the searches that the true crime world type, it would look disturbing. And I am sorry that you've got to deal with whatever challenges you do face, Angelina. I have my own issues with my health, and it's does make things challenging sometimes, it's got to be said. Yeah, there is a good chance that wherever they are, it's better than with being with Daniel and Malehya. It certainly doesn't sound like they had the greatest of home lives from everything that we've seen. But that being said, all Malehya had to do, if she couldn't handle them, or she was sick of them and she wanted to focus on her new family, or she needed a break or anything like that, is speak to somebody. Belinda's already said she'd have happily had them. I'm sure that one of her many relatives or friends would have helped. And if not, there are services available that can give you respite. They can like arrange weekends away for your kids and stuff. And you can actually voluntarily sign your children into being accommodated by most children's services without losing any of your rights over that child, and you can, take them back whenever you're ready. People are often scared of using that type of service, but it is there, and at the end of the day, that's better than having a situation where you do something that you can't take back once it's happened. So all in all, general outcome of hours of comparing the various articles is it's told us very little. It's not changed my viewpoint. I still believe that something happened to the children in that home and they were then removed thereafter. I hope with all of my heart that isn't true, and that the best case scenario is real and that they are somewhere safe and being cared for. But it doesn't make sense to me that that is true. They are so widely publicised as being missing that it's likely that if they were being kept somewhere, they would become too hot to handle. And that doesn't bode well. So either way, I don't think that the outcome is particularly great in all of the circumstances that we've got in front of us. I think that there's some really big red herrings in the documents, but I think that the important thing for us to do is to remember that they've cherry-picked what they're giving to us. The press have put their spin on what they've been given. They've all put slightly different spins on it, so if you don't go and read every single article, you're not getting a full picture of even what they've been provided with and what they've taken from it. And polygraphs are a bit pointless, especially if the questions are what the ones that Daniel described in his interview. So that doesn't give us anything to narrow things down with. I just hope that whatever happened, that the people that were involved have made some mistake somewhere down the line or will in the near future, so that the RCMP have got something to work with if they haven't already, because as I say, this is old material. We've got no idea where they're currently at. We're a month and a bit ahead of the 16th of July. They could have anything at this point in their possession, and they could have any theory alive that they're working on. So, yeah, she could have put them with her family. She could have put them with friends. She could have put them with Cody's family. And there are lots of options available for people. And for people that are struggling with children who might not be the easiest to manage, there are resources out there to help you find ways to do that more effectively. There are resources out there that can provide you with respite. The biggest, most effective thing that you can do if you're struggling, particularly if you are the victim of DV and you are isolated, is to find little ways of building a support network that aren't apparent to the perpetrator of that DV. If you're not the victim of DV and you're just struggling with your children, the key is a support network. Friends, family, go to like play groups with younger children, go to free activities, look at what your local area puts on in terms of free activities, utilize them to build connections with people that you can then share the load a bit with and share ideas with. Because none of us get a manual about how to raise our children when they're born. We've got to learn along the way. And the best way to do that is to absorb as much information about it as you can. Rely on the people that you've got around you. I don't know when there is going to be a court hearing. I don't think they've actually made the application yet, Angelina. So I think Darlene is doing it pro bono. So she'll be trying to kind of fit it in between her paying clients. It takes a little while to get all the information together for the application itself. And I have to confess, I don't know what the timescales are like in Canada, in that area in particular, for getting court dates. I mean, looking at a court date for something that's not a child protection matter in my area at the moment, you're looking at December before you get a court hearing, but I'm in the middle of a city. So I can't really answer that, but I'll try and find out for you. and let you know on the next one. I think I've mentioned it before, that I'm in the middle of doing a kind of a full spreadsheet of who said what and when they said it. It's taking some time because I keep finding more things that in particular Daniel has said in various chats and things. But once I've got what I think is enough to start doing an analysis, I'll start doing that, and then we'll look at some of that on a live. But I'm having to squeeze it in between things, and it is taking some time. And thank you so much, Polar Vortex. All I want to do is try and share my experience at looking at this type of document and see if we can read between the lines and work out what, if anything, we can pin our colours to in terms of understanding what happened and just sharing some educational information that might make life better for just one child. Then it's worth it. You know, this is a tiny channel at the moment, but I'm nearly done, dude. I'm being asked about whether I want my tea saving. So I think it might be nearly ready, which is a good reason to end it here. But yeah, it's, you know, this isn't gonna make me any money, but it's worth doing if I can make one child's life better. And if I can make it better for more, and I can make a difference to, you know, the spider effect of information, I can certainly send it to them, Polar Vortex. I don't know whether they'll willingly accept it, but I'll reach out to them and let them know when I've done it and see, you know, there might be some material on there that they didn't know existed. I would hope that they're watching everything that they're all saying. Yeah, I've been following the Dylan Rounds case, but I've not done any coverage of it. But yeah, I have been watching that. Yeah, it's kids. At the end of the day, it's kids. It's the impact of any of the things that you've described on kids. It's trafficking of kids and it's harm of kids. And it's, you know, for me, every child should be able to grow up safe, happy and unharmed. And we should all be working towards that. That's my true belief, is that we should all be working towards that. Kids should be allowed to be safe, happy kids, and should be given the tools to be happy, productive adults. And on that note, I can hear pots rattling, so I'm going to end the live here. But I will see you all on the next one. And thank you everyone for coming and taking part. I've really enjoyed it. Only leaves me to say, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see you next time.